Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, June the 17th, 2022. I'd just like for you to confirm that you can actually see and hear me because it's been a while since I've done this, and I just want to make sure that everything is working. So if you could do that for me. Loud and clear. Okay, excellent. Okay, so as you probably know, I was suspended from YouTube for 2 weeks. And why is that? Apparently, cyberbullying I was accused of. And it may have been about comments I made about a recently convicted infamous person in British Columbia whose name I'm now afraid to mention. Well, any one of the three names that this person has used. So obviously I'm going to have to switch to a different platform, but been somewhat under the weather lately. I've been having trouble sleeping because just the, how would I put it? Just the riot across the street gets worse and worse. Last night, I didn't get to sleep until 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. You had the normal appearance of, it's normally between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning, of what I assume is a drug dealer with very, very loud woofer speakers so that the building is shaking. This went on for about half an hour, and I would assume that somebody in the hotel would start screaming at them to stop, or that, in that homeless shelter, they have some sort of management that would tell them to stop. Maybe they're just too afraid of them. There was the usual screaming, dogs barking for a very, very long time, and what appeared to be someone, I don't know, smashing the parking lot or the walls of the place with a hammer or a mallet or something like that. Even if I close the window, it doesn't make any difference because it's so loud. But I am back now. Let's take a look at the chat. Hello to Clownvelt, Dan, Polygons, Anrun, Quachalongo, Mercurius, Olycus, Visionary Companion, Emmett Kelly's Earth, Joe Kent 666, Brian Frakes, Dawn from Beyond. And yeah, please don't mention that man's name. Hello to Jim Smith and Rodion Raskolnikov. Wherever you go after YouTube, I suppose Odyssey or Rumble. I just need to confirm that you can actually have live chat on those platforms. And you've got to wear earplugs and take melatonin and or valerian roots, as Dawn from Beyond. Well, thank you for that. Polygon said, so sorry, Kevin, I lived in an environment like that for 2 years and it drove me insane. Cities have become unlivable. I came across this comment by this well-known feminist author, Jessica something or other. And she was saying, oh, what's all this talk about the homeless making life unsafe? They're more afraid of us than we are of them. Ho, ho, very satirical. I'll start today with something at the American Sun, which is presumably Ryan Landry's winners, losers, and links for the week. Winners: Russian finances, energy revenues exploded to cover war expenditures, and foreign firms are selling the Russian assets at fire sale prices. Big tent GOP advocates, one Hispanic woman flips a seat in a low turnout vote and they go wild. More focus on her attributes than her message. More Dems are the real racist talk. They can enjoy the win for now. And market shorts, more pain as nothing looks good. The losers: prospective home buyers, mortgage rates at 6%, but prices still high. Market might crack soon enough and offer relief. And finally, third world food importers. Food insecurities await. Look for a massive migration to Europe to commence in earnest. This isn't my phrase, but I came across it recently. That I really think that what we've been going through in the last 2 years is a controlled demolition of the economy, or perhaps a controlled demolition of the world, except that the geniuses, our elites, are too stupid to pull off anything like this. They really seem to just be bemused, gobsmacked by how the whole Ukraine situation has, well, made them look like idiots. Let's go to Jim Kunstler. Of course, I have to be very careful what I quote from him. His column today is called How Low Can You Go? Lots of things are going south all at once. Remember limbo? It was a dance fad, kind of like the Olympic high jump in reverse. Instead of leaping over a horizontal bar, you duck walked under it to calypso music with the crowd squealing, how low can you go? As it happens in the culture of Western Civ, limbo is also the name of a place on the edge of hell. Either way, you have the apt metaphor for the spot that the USA is in as it enters this summer of double deuce. Lots of things are going south all at once. The stock markets and bond prices, Bitcoin is doing a vanishing act. The Colorado River reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, are so low that by September, both water and electricity may run out for a vast region that includes Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Southern California. The housing market is tanking. Suburbia's business model is broken. Whole herds of beef cattle roll over and die out in the range. Fertilizer is scarce. Food processing plants get torched by the dozen. Shortages loom. The oil and gas industry is getting killed 4 ways. 1, our stupid Russian sanctions queered long-standing global distribution arrangements. 2, the industry is starved for capital. 3, depletion is seriously kicking in. And 4, Joe Biden and the knuckleheads running the European Union countries are trying to kill it so as to usher in a Green New Deal that just doesn't pencil out. The car dealers have no new cars on their lots, and pretty soon they'll run out of decent used cars, which these days are often priced higher than the non-existent new cars. How's that for a business model? Plus, the financially beaten up middle class can't afford cars in either case and increasingly can't qualify for car loans. Kunstler continues, the airline industry reels with a sucking chest wound due to a pilot shortage, thanks to vax mandates, and the high cost of jet fuel. The trucking industry's business model is also broken, with diesel fuel over $6 a gallon. The cost of delivery exceeds the value of the cargo. America runs on trucks, and if they stop running, so does everything else. Replacement parts are growing scarce for every mechanical device in the land. It's getting harder to fix anything that's broken. Joe Biden's proxy war against Russia and Ukraine isn't working out. It was flamboyantly stupid from the get-go. We deliberately broke the Minsk agreements for a ceasefire in the Donbass to goad the Russians into action. NATO didn't have the troops or the political mojo to back up its U.S.-inspired bluster. Our financial warfare blew back in our faces and actually benefited the Russian economy and its currency, the ruble. The billions of dollars in weapons we're sending into the war are easily interdicted in transport, or else are getting loose in a world of non-state maniacs running from the Taliban to Al-Qaeda to drug cartels. Meanwhile, Russia steadfastly grinds out a victory on the ground that will leave it in control of the Black Sea and will reveal the USA's lost capacity to impose its will around the world. In other words, our Ukraine project to weaken Russia brought on an epochal shift in the balance of power to our enormous disadvantage. This is on top of more than 20 years of U.S. military fiascos, from Afghanistan to Iraq to North Africa to Syria, which demonstrated our reckless disregard for human life and a gross inability to carry out a mission. This aggregate failure and display of weakness leaves us vulnerable to Chinese aggression in the Pacific. There is even spooky chatter now about China venturing to invade Australia, Japan, and the U.S. mainland. Yes, really. With all this to be concerned about, half the American public and the Joe Biden regime, they insist, well, I won't say that, remain enthralled to the COVID-19 horror movie. and at the mercy of the mRNA pharmaceutical products. But now all the cover stories are falling apart. It's getting harder to conceal, well, let's say the contraindications. I'll just leave it at that. Kunstler continues, the CDC FDA pharma cabal strategy for now, keep bluffing and quintupling down on what they're doing. They just sweepingly authorized mRNA shots for babies. Why? To extend the emergency use authorization that shields Pfizer and Moderna from liability. To try to head off oncoming disaster for the elite, the Joe Biden regime just announced a second attempt to control the news flow with a White House disinformation task force to replace the ludicrous Homeland Security Disinformation Governance Board that flopped so miserably in May when its appointed chief, Ms. Jankowicz, turned out to be a prime purveyor of disinformation. The new Disinfo task force, led by VP Kamala Harris, who performed so well in her previous assignment as border czar, is pretending to be all about online sexual harassment and gender bigotry. And Kunstler continues, it won't work. Joe Biden is running on empty. His regime staggers on in a delirium and an odium, like one of those groaning, brain-leaking zombies on cable TV. The voters are poised to unload 2 barrels of buckshot to this monster's head in September if we're not prevented from holding election. Okay, not going to repeat that. Until we're in a race to see just how the party of chaos completes the destruction of the economy, which is the prelude to the people of the USA destroying the party of chaos. Now, I understand that this term, controlled demolition, might be considered a controversial or a conspiracy theory, but let's see what Joe Biden himself has had to say about this. This is from Wendell Husbo at Breitbart. Then candidate Joe Biden said in 2019 that he would end the fossil fuel industry in the United States. There's a direct quotation from a campaign appearance in Newcastle, New Hampshire. I want you to look at my eyes. I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuels. Bush said something similar in 2020 on the Democrat primary debate stage. Biden promised to wage war on the American oil industry by terminating subsidies and drilling feasibility. Quote, no more subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, no more drilling, including offshore, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. Biden said of his energy policies if he won the presidency. It ends. Now, of course, Biden, or who's ever running the government, I'm told it's a woman called Susan Rice, haven't really thought this through because they have no idea how the economy works. Oil is becoming scarcer, much more expensive to get out of the ground. And companies like ExxonMobil, their offshore drilling programs, they spend billions of dollars before they even sink any drills. That's how expensive it's become. There is nothing in place to be a substitute for evil old fossil fuel. It's not ready, even if it's possible that it could ever be ready, but they just decided to go ahead anyway. Because, you never let a mistake, a tragedy, whatever, go to waste. Isn't that how it goes? Here's a column by Don Serber. Economy crumbles, Trump rises, New York Times whines. The New York Times is worried voters may throw out Democrats come November. It told readers a recession would hurt Democrats. Some warned it also hurt democracy. By trying to tame inflation, some commentators say, the Federal Reserve could bring about a recession, just as an unrepentant Donald Trump appears to be eyeing another White House bid. So there you have it. Voters electing our leaders threaten democracy. Well, yes. Loss of support for Biden, 11 points in 1 year. According to Serber, it reflects his surrender of Afghanistan, rising crime, rising murder, failure in Ukraine, and most of all, the worst inflation in 2 generations. Most Americans were not around when Reagan cured Carter's inflation 40 years ago because the average age of an American is less than 39 years old. Those who don't learn from history will be paying $10 a gallon for gasoline by Labor Day. All of us will. Which brings me back to the New York Times piece. After noting that the cure for runaway inflation is a recession, the New York Times was alarmed that a recession would bring back Donald Trump. Democrats keep telling us he is an authoritarian figure, yet he didn't even use the FBI to spy on political opponents. Obama did. Heck, Trump couldn't even get General Milley to stop calling Red China to think on him. Since when did the New York Times ever care about facts? It just lies. It is a disinformation and misinformation machine. A lot of things, as Kunstler noted, are going south simultaneously. And one of them is the condition of America's cities, conditions on the ground. This is from Gina Martinez at the Daily Mail. The streets of Portland resemble an open-air drug market after state officials' scheme to decriminalize hard drugs led to a surge in overdose deaths, critics claim. Law enforcement agents say that the streets of Portland are full of homeless addicts openly buying and selling drugs, and the signs of drug addiction are actually increasing statewide. Photos show the desperate situation in the liberal Pacific Northwest city, where people can be seen shooting up drugs or passed out in broad daylight. The dreadful scene comes 16 months after ballot measure 110, which passed with 58.8% support, decriminalized hard drugs in the Democrat-run state. Well, the same thing is happening in Vancouver and Victoria, the latter city being where I live. And no, there was no vote on this because Canadians don't get to vote on that. I suppose the police just decided that they weren't going to enforce drug laws anymore. And then the federal government said, okay, British Columbia, you can decriminalize everything. And this is harm reduction. They call it harm reduction. And various harm reduction policies have been in place for decades now on the West Coast. And the situation just gets worse and worse. More and more fatal overdoses, more and more broken people stumbling down the sidewalk, bent over typically, often not wearing shoes, screaming obscenities or general imprecations, falling down and, relieving themselves on the streets and sleeping in the doorways. And the streets, of course, are befouled by the detritus of their dogs because these people who are very, very poor, they still have the wherewithal to afford to keep dogs. Very strange to me. Some people see a bigger picture here. This is a story from LifeSite News. It comes from an interview that Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano gave on TV. And the headline of the story is Freemasonry is using the WHO and the Bergoglian Church to advance its global coup. We are governed by members of a global lobby of criminal conspirators who tell us directly that their plan is to eliminate us. And the whole time we were sitting here wondering why we have to wear masks on buses and not in restaurants. And he talks about, the situation in Europe with the stranglehold of what he calls the Troika, the International Monetary Fund, the European Commission, and the European Central Bank. Finally, the subversive action of the UN Agenda 2030, that is the Great Reset of the World Economic Forum, has as its declared purpose the transfer of the wealth of nations and individuals to large investment funds managed by the globalist mafia. This subversive operation must be denounced and prosecuted by the magistrates because it constitutes a true silent coup against the community. I would, Archbishop Vigano continues, like to point out that the economic aspect is only one means of achieving far more worrying goals, such as total control of the world's population and its enslavement. If citizens are deprived of home ownership, if they are prevented from having freedom of enterprise, if endemic unemployment is caused and increased by uncontrolled immigration and health emergencies, reducing labor costs, if Italians are harassed with exorbitant taxes, if the traditional family is penalized by making it practically impossible for two young people to marry and have children, if education is destroyed beginning in elementary school and the cultural vacuum is created by frustrating the talent of individuals, if the history of our native land is canceled and the glorious heritage that made Italy great is denied, in the name of inclusiveness and the renunciation of our national identity, what can one expect if not a society without a future, without hopes, without the desire to fight and engage? I've been thinking about this for years, that okay, so people used to expect certain things, countries like Canada and the United States. They used to expect to, assuming they were reasonably diligent and not, idiotic, to have a reasonably well-paying job, to be able to afford a home, to be able to afford to get married, to be able to afford to have children. One could say to have communities. Then it was decided that no, we can't have communities anymore. Only rich people can enjoy what pretty much everyone used to take for granted. But instead, what people, particularly young people, have been offered is license. You want to become a trans person, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, whatever, sure, you can do that. Do you want to have unlimited access to pornography over the internet, delivered at high speed and increasingly higher quality? Yes, you can have that. You want an Xbox player? And sure, you can have that. And you can have, microwave meals, say, or meals delivered to your tiny apartments, if you can afford to have one. What happens if that starts going away? Because our regime doesn't really offer much for people. Well, I say normal people, and we see this is one of the reasons why, by all accounts, our peoples are becoming more and more insane. Measured, quantified. Joe Biden's talking about it. But what if that, what if that was all that was carved out for us began to disappear? It seems to be the belief of our elites that people are just going to take it. And frankly, I'm really not so sure about that. People who have nothing or nearly nothing famously have nothing to lose. And let's go back to the chat. Strategic Adaptive Memeplex said, strengthened the dollar, busted up the cartels. Carter was one of the best we've had over the last 30 years. I don't know. Is airline deregulation arguably a big mistake? Helpcasso 88 says, I saw Top Gun Maverick. It was the first movie I've seen in the theaters in almost 3 years. Chokin 666 says, liberty without responsibility is license. Indeed. Oscar To says, also, I watched The Virgin Spring, which was one of the best films I've ever seen. I'd have to agree. And who else do we have here? Oh, watch any movies in the break. I rewatched The Sweet Smell of Success, which is one of my favorite movies. Also, The Night of the Hunter. And I always forget movies or the names of them after I have seen them. Hello to My Trail of Disgrace. Out the kinks and learn ins and outs of each and get feedback from regulars on audio and such. Each of the alt platforms has their strengths and weaknesses, ease of saving stream, degree of buffering. Again, thank you for that. Enron does not like Robin Williams, and neither do I. Neither do I. Brian Frake says, Vivat Vigano. Okay. We lost the culture war. Now they control the language. Why are men waiting? Says Don Willis. Oh, God, the Postmates. I may or may not talk about this. Again, I could scarcely believe this. I could scarcely believe this. We're a delivery service which is owned by Uber, and Uber's market cap, the last time I checked, was $46.6 billion. So Uber is a big player. And they own Postmates, and they presented a video. It's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, and so disgusting that I could scarcely believe it. Odyssey and Rumble both have live chat, but streamer user templates are different from YT and each other with a bit of learning curve and need for OBS. Recommend doing some shorter test streams on each to work. Again, thank you for that. I've never seen The Idiot. Are we talking about Karasua's? Yes, Karasua's filmic version of The Idiot. Okay. A little bit of the usual Kunstler hopium there. He had less of it in his Monday blog. Look, as I've been saying about Kunstler for a long time, doomsayers only need to be right once. Of course, he largely predicted what happened in 2007, 2008, but we learned nothing from that. Oh, yes, let's have the richest and most powerful people in the world, and let's give them more influence, power, and money, because they only have, they only want the best for us. Hello to Pete Bauman and Gamion. Well, drag queens. Okay, so drag queen story hour, story time has been around for a couple of years now, and does any of this seem planned to you? That just in the last month, every community in America and Canada has to have drag queen story time. Oh, and family-friendly drag performances involving men who've made themselves into caricatures, fiendish caricatures of women associating with small children. Don Willis says, I find it amusing that a giant like YouTube is afraid of a financially strapped elderly man who broadcasts from a seedy hotel room. Yes. Or, again, to quote Chris Morris, my sordid little grief hole. That's from, the first Alan Partridge series. Hello to Half Galician. Nice to see you here. Alrighty. Let's talk about the Ukraine. And I'm going to go again to the site Moon of Alabama, moonofalabama.org. Today's column is called The U.S. is Moving Towards Escalation. The catastrophic economic consequences of the Western proxy war with Russia are setting in. As a result, the high inflation caused by supply-side constraints due to sanctions and far too much spending will ruin the middle classes of many countries. Those who did not wear blinders and who knew of the real economies of the West and Russia, this was very predictable and predicted. And the writer quotes himself, the U.S. is pushing its European allies to commit economic suicide by sanctioning everything Russia. The U.S. should be more careful. It is one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil, and its aircraft industry depends on titanium from Russia. Russia surely knows who is trying to hurt it the most, and it surely knows how and has the means to hurt back. The hurt has not at all reached its peak. This winter will be very difficult for Europe. Poor countries are even worse off. Many will experience hunger crises and riots. Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin held a speech at the Petersburg Economic Forum in which he said therein, the United States, having declared victory in the Cold War, declared themselves the messengers of God on earth who have no obligations but only interests. They seem not to notice that powerful new centers have formed on the planet. The changes in the world are fundamental, pivotal, and inexorable. And it is a mistake to believe that you can sit out at the time of rapid changes, wait out that supposedly everything will return to normal, everything will be as before. It won't. There will be a deep degradation in Europe. Current elites are going to be replaced Their wrong policies will lead to an increase in nationalist and extremist sentiments in European society. The world was systematically driven into a huge global crisis by the countries of the so-called G7. The EU has totally lost its political sovereignty. Its elites are dancing to someone else's tune, causing harm to their own population. So, Moon of Alabama makes a prediction. Escalation. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, undoubtedly on order of Biden, appeared in Kiev to lobby for more war, just as he did at the end of March when he told Ukraine's President Zelensky to ditch the negotiations with Russia. This is why I fear that Michael Brenner is right and that Biden will escalate the war by attacking somewhere else. And where else might that be? Over the past year, the U.S. attempted to foment Maidan-style regime changes in Belarus and Kazakhstan. Both were foiled. The latter was with the connivance of Turkey, which deployed a contingent of Bashi bazooks from the stock of Syrian jihadis it keeps on call in Idlib to be deployed as President Erdogan did more successfully in Libya and Azerbaijan. There remains one conceivable sensitive target, Syria. There, the Israelis have become increasingly audacious in goading the Russians by airstrikes against Syrian infrastructure as well as military facilities. Now we see signs that Moscow's tolerance is wearing thin, suggesting that further provocations could spark retaliation, which Washington could then exploit to ratchet up tensions. To what avail? Not obvious, unless the ultras in the Biden administration are looking for the kind of direct confrontation that they've avoided in Ukraine until now. Another, even grimmer prospect would be a contrived test of wills with China. Already we see growing evidence of that in the bellicose rhetoric of American leaders from U.S. President Joe Biden on down. I expect airstrikes, like last week's attack on the airport of Damascus, to intensify with the hope of diverting Russian attention from the Ukraine. Russia is, of course, 100% prepared for that, but U.S. miscalculations that led to this are many, and I do not expect that tendency to change anytime soon. And he goes on to recommend a video about the causes and consequences of the Ukraine war by Professor John Mearsheimer, a famous realist. Of course, realism is is considered immoral now, turning the Ukraine into a charnel house with Ukrainian soldiers just being massacred, hundreds of them a day in heavy artillery fire. Apparently that is not immoral. And antiwar.com, Priti Patel, because that is her name, Britain's Home Secretary, signs Assange extradition order. U.S. secretly approves Israeli airstrikes in Syria. Syrian farmers struggle due to U.S.-backed Kurds' ban on wheat sales. Israel's Damascus airport strike heralds new phase of conflict. Drones attack U.S.-backed Syrian rebels at U.S. base. Senators bring Biden's military budget to $857 billion. And where are we going to go next? Let's go to Summit News. Controversial refugee facility in small village of just 700 residents recruiting staff despite government claiming it's on hold. And the name of this village is, hang on, where is it? This is in England. Oh, Linton on Ouse. It's a tiny village with one store, and they're doubling the population. 700 population, 1,500 so-called migrants who will bring all their enrichment and diversity. Germany to make mask mandates permanent every year, not just this year, every year. Paul Joseph Watson notes there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. More oil industry heads blast Biden for threats and blame over the energy crisis. You know, when things become rarer they become more valuable. They cost more. Again, this is the way of the world. Yeah, late 70s, early 80s, that was such a long time ago that no one, even Joe Biden, who's a very old man, can be expected to remember them. This is from Information Liberation. According to the ACLU, crime-free housing ordinances are tools of racial segregation. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel calls for a drag queen for every school, just like a chicken in every pot, they used to say. But now, a different sort of sustenance is needed. My country of Canada is increasingly becoming a banana republic. Things are moving very quickly in Canada. Earlier this year, as you know, martial law was declared in Canada, the so-called Emergencies Act, which has never been used in Canadian history. Why was it enacted? We don't know. And the government is refusing to tell us. And they are, not to put too fine a point on it, lying about it. Rex Murphy has a column in the National Post. Chrystia Freeland isn't interested in your questions about the Emergency Act. Liberals, ministers don't like answering questions. Chrystia Freeland is more vexing than Justin Trudeau. This is quite a milestone. We all grant that she is smarter. She is the finance minister and deputy prime minister. But we thought that he had commanded that other territory as all his own. From evidence to date, which should be a solemn, substantive, principled hearing into the invoking of the Emergency Act by the Trudeau government, is being treated by all the relevant ministers, and particularly Freeland, as a laugh, as some comic diversion, eating up the prestigious time of so important cabinet ministers who have so many other deeper, more powerful things to think about. Granted, the committee investigating the use of the Emergencies Act is only about piddling trivial matters such as civil liberties, bank accounts frozen, arson alleged, property seized, police jamming the streets, jail without bail. When the government called the act into question, it was about staving off an insurrection. Yes, that's what they're actually calling it, our elites. It's an insurrection. Again, like January 6th, it's a funny kind of insurrection where the insurrectionists don't bring guns. Saying peace, order, and good government, keeping nefarious actors at bay, tracking down a dreaded Confederate flag waver, and of course, forestalling a hideous arson attempt. The safety of the whole nation and its government was at stake. You can see on the lips and in the tone of the main actors, Mendocino, Algabra, Blair, and Freeland, the sullen pout of, do we really have to go through with this? After all, we canceled the whole damn thing before it was even ratified. So a Conservative MP named Larry Brock asked Chrystia Freeland a question in the House of Commons. Did the government rely on CBC reports? Did those funding the convoy pose a security threat? Freeland treated his questions as passing amusement. She was flippant, condescending, evasive, and deliciously self-satisfied. She gave a masterclass in smugness, and that in itself is an accomplishment given who her boss is. Now, it is the duty of ministers, government ministers in a parliamentary system, to answer questions put to them by members of the House. Sometimes they don't have the answers on them, but they are pledged to answer them as quickly as they can. It is now routine in my country, under both liberal and conservative governments, to simply ignore questions from MPs. Oh, and there's a question for the Prime Minister. Well, no, the Prime Minister's not going to take this question. Well, the Prime Minister is an MP too. But no, they don't answer it. They make sarcastic comments, or they'll just repeat the same non-response again and again. And these people, they seem to express bewilderment at the lack of respect for the Canadian government and Canadian government institutions. In other Banana Republic news, meals for Governor General actually cost $80,000 on Middle East flight. The tab included 3 dinners, 3 breakfasts, 2 lunches, and various snacks for the 29 passengers plus 17 crew, including the flight crew and security personnel. So apparently Mary Simon, who was the first Indigenous Governor General, and another in the long list of arrogant women to hold that post, she actually let it be known that she didn't understand that lobster and caviar are expensive. 29 passengers. Why is the Governor General of Canada visiting Dubai? What possible connection does Canada have with Dubai? A trip of the Middle East. It's just it's a spree, is what it is. And it's free vacation. Trudeau's government is quite unpopular, but they're going to do something about that. The media is on board, with very few exceptions, because they've been bought off by the government with hundreds of millions of dollars in grants. And these grants continue, not a one-time thing. The main opposition is on social media. And social media, well, it can be controlled to a certain extent by Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, or whatever. But it is, for the most part, inchoate and uncontrolled. And Trudeau's government is doing something on this quickly. This is from Jack Bingham at LifeSite News. Trudeau's Liberal government, with the help of the far left and New Democratic Party, successfully voted to shut down the debate on controversial internet censorship bill C-11. According to Blacklock's reporter, the motion to axe the debate surrounding the controversial piece of legislation was passed by a 174 to 146 vote. The result was unsurprising, as NDP leader Jagmeet Singh struck a deal with Trudeau earlier this year, vowing that his party would support the Liberals until the end of Trudeau's term in 2025. In a late-night session on Tuesday, Bill C-11, the Internet Censorship Bill, was rammed through committee hearings, with the Liberals, NDP, and Bloc Québécois joining forces to quash all debate. Most of 170 proposed amendments were hastily voted on without any discussion or public disclosure of the content. The criticism of expert witnesses was ignored. Now C-11 will return to the House of Commons on Thursday or Friday for a final third reading and vote. Yes, that's how quickly things can move in Canada. I mean, arguably, any bill could be passed in a day or two. Debate. We don't need no stinking debate. What, are you in favor of misogyny, racism, white supremacy? And our institutions are falling apart. They're not only falling apart, they're moaning. They are just a collective howl against the horror of Canada. This is from CBC. An expansive Toronto police report released Wednesday confirms what many racialized people in the city have long said: Black, Indigenous, and other diverse groups are disproportionately affected by the use of force and strip searches by officers. I wonder why that might be, because they commit far more crimes. At a morning news conference, interim Toronto Police Chief James Raymer said the force needs to do better. As an organization, we have not done enough to ensure that every person in our city receives fair and unbiased policing. As Chief of Police and on behalf of the police, I'm sorry, and I apologize unreservedly. The release of this data will cause pain for many. We must improve, and we will do better. The apology was not welcomed by Beverly Bain from the group No Pride in Policing, which describes itself as a coalition of queer and trans people formed in support of Black Lives Matter Toronto and focused on defunding police. In a tense moment, during the news conference, Bain slammed Raymer's response to the data. Quote, Chief Raymer, we do not accept your apology. She said, putting a point on an impassioned speech about how Black, Indigenous, and other racialized groups have had to deal with police in the city. Bain called Raymer's apology a public relations stunt that is insulting to Black and Indigenous people. This is not about saving our lives. What we have asked for you to do is to stop brutalizing us, to stop killing us. Well, it's very obvious what's going to happen in Toronto, and it's going to happen very quickly. The city is going to become Canada's Detroit, because any attempt to hold so-called racialist groups for their actions, well, it's racist, it's illegitimate, it's white supremacist. So they will simply stop doing it. Oh, they'll pretend that they haven't stopped, but it's more than their job's worth. Meanwhile, what's happening with the RCMP? RCMP updates its core values for the first time in 25 years with commitments to reconciliation and diversity. This is from Catherine Tunney at CBC News. The RCMP is updating its statement of core values for the first time in a quarter century by adding references to reconciliation, diversity, honor, and empathy. Yep, time for them to revisit and renew their core values. Quote, we're aware of a number of trust-altering events throughout the world, as well as in Canada, that have eroded and affected public trust in policing. And, Laporte said the RCMP consulted with its members and outside groups, including Indigenous elders and groups representing alphabet people, Black and racialized Canadians, and people with disabilities before crafting the new statement. Well, there's going to be no room for white men in the RCMP soon enough. And also, our Canadian military is also apologizing because when they integrated women into the Canadian military in the 1990s, it never occurred to them that these men and women would start having sex with each other. It was just shocking to them. So the so-called Freedom Convoy is returning to Ottawa for Canada Day, and there will just be a spasm of savage excitement amongst our elite. Oh my God, the insurrection is back. I wonder if the Emergencies Act will be instituted once again. There's been a controversy in Canada about how many Canadian politicians are recognized members, experts. They're mentees of the World Economic Forum. Well, if you go to their website, younggloballeaders.org, and new class, who are these people? One of my favorites is Joy Buolamwini, who was described as the founder and executive director of Algorithmic Justice League, USA. How childish this is. Oh, the Justice League. You mean like the Justice League of America? No, but this is the Algorithmic Justice League. And what is the Algorithmic Justice League? What is it, Justice League? Well, what it is you take AI and you take what AI tells us in its prediction of patterns, and then you make it stop working. By instructing the AI, for instance, if A equals 5, then A does not equal 5. Stuff like that. So, see, AI is racist because it notices patterns. But there are just so many of these organizations like the Algorithmic Justice League. How much of the economy of Canada, the United States, or Britain for that matter, Ireland, other places, is just straight up parasitism. Kia Williams is the co-founder and managing director supporting initiatives to redistribute unused medicine. Of course, a lot of these people have doctors of education, not even PhDs, but doctors of education in academic disciplines such as being awesome in leadership. I'm not really exaggerating that much. These degrees are useless, but there must be some sort of certificates for these people to have in order to claim their benefits. Now, here's some good news. Intersectionality, as I have said for many years, leads to the war of all against all. And we are seeing this increasingly and hilariously in woke institutions. This happened in the Governor General's office, last year, with all the employees were on paid sick leave because they had the SADs or they were openly weeping. And also in Status of Women Canada, I believe. But here's a story from the CBC. AFN National Chief under investigation over bullying harassment allegations. Now, the AFN is the Assembly of First Nations. Now, you might find this difficult to believe, but some decades ago, the Canadian government decided that it had to have a national Indian organization, and so it created it. It is funded by the federal government. So the federal government pays a great deal of money for an organization which does nothing but mobilize against the government. I'm looking at a picture here of Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald, and guess what? She's morbidly obese. She wears problem glasses, and she has purple hair, which is not a good look for a woman in what I would imagine to be her 50s. The national chief of the country's most influential First Nations organization is under pressure to step aside as she faces an external investigation over bullying and harassment allegations from 4 of her staff members. In a statement issued Thursday, the AFN confirmed it received a number of complaints last month against Archibald and determined the findings supported further inquiry by an external investigator. Archibald says she welcomes the investigations and called for a forensic audit. In her statement, Archibald claimed she had never had a human resources complaint launched against her prior to work at AFN. This is the second time that I've endured a smear campaign as a result of my relentless pursuit of the truth. I hope people can see the toxic pattern at the AFN. Archibald alleges the 4 staff members filed complaints against her after they tried to secure $1 million in contract payouts. The background deals, the large payouts to staff, and other documented incidents of corruption and collusion have caused us to lose sight of our shared goal to fight for the collective rights of more than 900,000 Indigenous people living in more than 600 First Nations communities, cities, and towns across, wait for it, Turtle Island. The whistleblower mechanism the staff used to file complaints against Archibald was created last year following a separate bullying and harassment investigation of her while she was Ontario Regional Chief. The new complaints include objections to Archibald's alleged introduction of a Hawaiian cultural practice called Ho'oponopono during weekly meetings. Again, I'm not making this up. The complaints claim that the practice sees Archibald recite prayers for staff members' healing or in response to their errors, and say that she asked them to share their childhood traumas. Boy, that's not going to lead to any problems. Nope, not a bit of it. Multiple sources who spoke to CBC News and some staff members complained this practice served to re-traumatize them. The sources spoke on the condition they not be named because they fear reprisals. Archibald's counsel, Aaron Detler, told CBC he's unaware of any Hawaiian cultural practices employed by the national chief or of her asking people to reveal childhood traumas. He said he's aware Archibald believes strongly in Indigenous-based healing. The 4 staff members who made the complaints are on paid leave. Of course they are. Sources said the problems at the AFN office in Ottawa began shortly after Archibald took office last summer. They described the workplace as toxic and said staff dread coming to work each day. The same sources who have direct knowledge of the workings of the National Chief's office said staff claimed they've been yelled at by the National Chief and reduced to tears by her criticism of their work. Three sources said Archibald still has not signed her employment contract and has demanded she be paid the same salary as the Prime Minister. And she wants to dissolve the AFN Secretariat, the administrative and operational arm of the organization, which employs about 200 people. Again, this seems like a lark, but there's serious money involved in this. And, when the AFN speaks, people listen, even though it is the very definite definition of an astroturf organization. A funny thing about Canada's Indigenous people, they have a very strange understanding of the crown. They believe that the Queen has great and direct political power in Canada. They're always making demands of the Queen. And I discussed this with Native Indians, some of whom are as mystified as I am, why they would believe such a thing. But there we go. There's an older story. Actually, this is the funny story that I was going to get to about the pretensions of this woman and her ilk. This is from Sky News. Queen must apologize for treatment of Indigenous people in Canada, Prince Charles told. Roseanne Archibald says she asked Charles to request his mother apologize on behalf of the Anglican Church for how Indigenous people in Canada have been treated. It comes after hundreds of human remains were discovered. No, they weren't. Were discovered at former church-run schools last year. Prince Charles told her to pound sand, as it turns out. But it is always nice to see science seemingly ratify one's prejudices. And here's another example. This is from the Substack of Emil Kierkegaard. Unnatural hair color really is a danger zone marker, validating yet another 4chan meme as good and proper science. Probably many of you have seen this meme about aposematic hair color. And yeah, I'm looking at a bunch of women who there's Zoe there, and yeah, a bunch of maybe that feminist that I mentioned earlier at the top of the show. Yeah, and the famous red-haired woman with the problem glasses and the ferocious look on her face. From Wikipedia, aposematism, perhaps most commonly known in the context of warning coloration, describes a family of anti-predator adaptations where a warning signal is associated with the unprofitability of a prey item to potential predators. It is one form of advertising. For those not into memes, the idea that poisonous animals advertise their dangerousness by bright colors to scare away predators. Humans appear to do the same, as those who are poisonous, mentally ill, color their hair in bright, dangerous-looking colors. Since this meme was made in about 2014, we've seen a strong increase in the number of people with unnatural hair colors. In the same time, we have seen a rise in mental illness in left-wingers. Coincidence? Probably not right. Zach Goldberg provided me with this example plot, but there's a lot more evidence. However, is it really true, though? Is unnatural hair color associated with mental illness, or are we being misled by a few prominent people with this hairstyle who appear very mentally ill? We decided to find out using the venerable OkCupid data set. And the study by Kierkegaard and Dutton, blue hair and the blues, dyeing your hair unnatural colors, is associated with depression. Quote, a number of lines of evidence, such as studies of religious converts and members of conspicuous subcultures, have found a relationship between holding and expressing a strong countercultural identity and mental instability. Here we test whether dyeing your hair an unnatural color, something which conspicuously expresses nonconformity, is related to mental instability using a large data set of online daters. We find the expected pattern. This pattern persisted even when controls for age, race, sex, sexual orientation, body type, intelligence, polyamory, vegetarianism, and political beliefs were included. The results show many points of interest. First, in the simplest models that include only our key variables of self-presentation, we see that unnatural hair color predicts mental illness with a moderately large size effect. And there is also a notable effect size for vegetarianism. This relationship may exist due to vegetarianism being an expression of a need for a strong identity, or perhaps because a high level of anxiety extends to anxiety about harm to animals. Having tattoos is a comparatively much weaker signal. Across the models, we add progressively more potential co-founder, such as age, sex, and sexual orientation, political ideology, and so on. However, we see that despite the inclusion of so many controls, unnatural hair color remains a fairly potent predictor of mental illness. Vegetarianism also retains most of its validity. For the covariates, we find similar findings with negative effects for non-heterosexuals compared with the reference group of heterosexual females. Somewhat strangely, we find that heterosexual men are higher in mental illness in this sample, perhaps reflecting self-selection of men who resort to dating sites as opposed to finding dates in physical settings such as bars. Despite our measures being relatively modest, the results work out well. There's no need to p-hacking anything when you study things that are true and strong. Indeed. I find the concept of apposematism to be a fascinating one myself, because it's clear looking at these women in the meme that they're sending off a strong message, which is stay away from me because I'm crazy. In the past, one had to get to know a woman, fairly well, or even to some degree, before you could conclude that they were crazy. Now they advertise it. They advertise it very strongly. Other signs, these sexual signifiers, metal in the mouth, metal in the rings, particularly in the septum, asymmetrical haircuts, multicolored hair, clothes which are too tight, so that skin, flesh spills out. Tattoos, of course, navel piercing. With tattoos, it seems, as far as mental illness goes, the closer any of these tattoos are to primary or secondary sexual organs, the crazier the woman will be. And what's the signifier? The signifier, in here is I will put out on the first date. That's the signifier. Now, there's kind of a lot of these women make themselves uglier, profoundly uglier than they are, which is the well-known wabi-sabi, effect. The idea that men are put off by physical perfection or beauty in women, so that as Marshall McLuhan said, men do make passes at women who wear glasses because they have deliberately made themselves more approachable. Hello to Diva Fever. And Gamian says, I'm no longer a vegan after over a decade of veganism, but I still have anxiety about harm to animals. I felt much more congruent and in peace when I rejected animal products. What are we talking about? There's a really bad movie where this dumb janitor kills beatniks and dips them in wax, and they start to think he's a beatnik genius artist. That's really quite a good movie, starring Dick Miller, Roger Corman movie. It's a satire of the art community. Aaron says, anyone see the Old Kids in the Hall skit, Girl Drink Drunk? Very amusing skit about a man who only drinks girly drinks. Well, so many, these flavored beers, these drinks that taste like candy. I mean, I have to consider that to be those to be girly drinks. They're quite popular with a lot of men. I mean, alcohol shouldn't taste like candy for all sorts of reasons. One being that it's dangerous because you really have no idea of how much you're consuming. Diva Fever says, has Mr. Grace commented on the very real likelihood that we're going to war with Russia yet? I consider it inconceivable. Of course, in matters like this, nothing is inconceivable. But how insane would they have to be? They think, oh, yeah, well, sure, we're willing to risk a nuclear war. They know that Russia has ICBMs, right? What's the assumption is, well, we're going to make a nuclear attack on Russia, but they won't retaliate? There's always the possibility that Russia, having intelligence that America was going to strike first, would strike first in kind. Okay. What, Oscar Toe? System analyst. 4chan is where you go for news. CNN is where you go for wild theories and sick behavior, says Dr. Deadname. Yo Mama says, my city had its first ever Pride event on June 4th. I protested across the street praying and holding icons. A woman confronted me. She had a shirt that said, proud parent of a trans daughter. Okay. Okay. Visited San Diego last weekend, says Gamian. Lots of homelessness, mostly white. The ugliest architecture I've seen in any American city. And yes, human poop on the pavement. La Jolla is lovely, though. La Jolla is one of the loveliest places that I have ever been to. Archibald stole Leo Loeb's problem glasses, no doubt. Oscar, you are really becoming Mr. Art House, says Anran. Okay. Let's get back to it here. Hawaiian religious practice. Yeah, what possible, reference would that have to Canadian Indians from, province of Ontario? More on this subject of the collapse of intersectionality, the war of all against all. This is a piece by Ryan Grimm in The Intercept called Elephant in the Room. Everyone acknowledged that Zoom was less than ideal as a forum for a heartfelt conversation on systemic racism but policing, but the meeting was urgent, and little more than 2 months into the COVID-19 lockdown, it would have to do. During the first week of June 2020, teams of workers and their managers came together across the country to share how they were responding to the murder of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis, and to chart out what, if anything, their own company or nonprofit could do to contribute toward the reckoning, there's that word again, with racial justice that was rapidly taking shape. On June the 2nd, one such huddle was organized by the Washington, D.C. office of the Guttmacher Institute, the abortion rights movement's premier research organization. Heather Boonstra, Vice President of Public Policy, began by asking how people were finding equilibrium. One of the details we know because it was later shared by staff with PRISM, an outlet that covers social justice advocacy and the impacts of injustice. She talked about the role systemic racism plays in society and the ways the Guttmacher's work could counter it. Staff suggestions, though, turned inward, including loosening deadlines and implementing more proactive and explicit policies for leave without penalty. Yes, I get the very strong feeling in all of these discussions about work organizations that have gone insane. What it comes down to is employees, mostly female employees, suffering from depression or the like, insisting that they're not up to work. And so they want to stay home and be paid for it. Now, obviously, you can do that with few people, but, as the numbers get higher and higher, no work is going to be done in these places. Of course, one wonders how much actual work is done in any of these places. Staffers suggested additional racial equity trainings, noting that a previous facilitator had said that the last round had not included sufficient time to cover everything. With no Black staff in the DC unit, it was suggested that Guttmacher do something tangible for Black employees in other divisions. Behind Boonstra's and the staff's responses to the killing was a fundamentally different understanding in the moment. For Boonstra and others of her generation, the focus should have been on the work of the nonprofit. What could Guttmacher, with an annual budget of nearly $30 million, do now to make the world a better place? For her staff, that question had to be answered at home first. What could they do to make Guttmacher a better place? Too often, they believe, managers exploited the moral commitment staff felt toward their mission, allowing workplace abuses to go unchecked. The belief was widespread in the eyes of group leaders dealing with similar moments. Staff were ignoring the mission and focusing only on themselves, using a moment of public awakening to smuggle through standard grievances cloaked in the language of social justice. Often, as was the case at Guttmacher, they played into the very dynamics they were fighting against, directing their complaints at leaders of color. Guttmacher was run at the time, and still is today, by an Afro-Latina woman, Dr. Herminia Palacio. The most zealous ones at my organization when it comes to race are white, said one Black executive director at a different organization. These starkly divergent views would produce dramatic schisms throughout the progressive world in the coming year. At Guttmacher, this process would rip the organization apart. Boonstra, unlike many managers at the time, didn't sugarcoat how she felt about the staff's responses to the killing. I'm here to talk about George Floyd and the other African-American men who have been beaten up by society, she told her staff, not workplace problems. Boonstra told them she was disappointed that they were being self-centered. The staff was appalled enough by the exchange to relay it to prison. Okay, so a career criminal, in his 50s, who is absurdly out of his mind on drugs, fentanyl in this case, tries to pass a phony $20 bill and is caught by the police. He repeatedly resists arrest and he dies in police custody. I'm just wondering, like the sort of people that would work at the Guttmacher Institute. Yes, George Floyd is just like me. No, he isn't. He's not even close to you. But it all has to be personal. What we've learned is that there's a group of people with strong opinions about a particular supervisor, that the new leadership and a change in strategic priorities, said a Guttmacher statement summarizing the findings of a review following the complaints. Those staff have a point of view. Complaints were duly investigated, nothing raised to the level of abuse or discrimination. Rather, what we saw was distrust, disagreement, and discontent with management decisions they simply did not like. A PRISM reporter reached a widely respected Guttmacher board member, Pamela Merritt, a Black woman and a leading reproductive justice activist, while the Supreme Court oral arguments in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization were going on last December, a year and a half after the Floyd meeting. She offered the most delicate rebuttal of the staff complaints possible. I have been in this movement space long enough to respect how people choose to describe their personal experience and validate that experience, even if I don't necessarily agree that that's what they experienced. Merritt said, it seems like there's a conflation between not reaching the conclusion that people want and not doing due diligence on the allegations, which is simply not true. The 6 months since then have only seen a ratcheting up of the tension, with more internal disputes spilling into public and amplified by well-funded anonymous operation called Repro Jobs, whose Twitter and Instagram feeds have pounded away at the organization's management. If your reproductive justice organization isn't black and brown, it's white supremacy in heels, co-opting a women of color movement, blared a typical missive subjected to and republished on one of its Instagram stories. The news in May 2022 that Roe v. Wade would almost certainly be overturned did nothing to temper the raging battle. Repro Jobs told The Intercept its current budget is around $275,000. That the Institute has spent the course of the Biden administration paralyzed makes it typical of not just the abortion rights community. Planned Parenthood, NARAL, and other reproductive health organizations has similarly been locked in to knock down, drag out fights between competing factions of their organizations, most often breaking down along staff versus management lines. It's also true of the progressive advocacy space across the board, which has more or less effectively ceased to function. the Sierra Club, Demos, the American Civil Liberties Union, Color of Change, the Movement for Black Lives, Human Rights Campaign, Time's Up, the Sunrise Movement, and many other organizations have seen wrenching and debilitating turmoil in the past couple of years, and it couldn't happen to a nicer group of people. Ryan Grimm writes, in fact, it's hard to find a Washington-based progressive organization that hasn't been in tumult or isn't currently in tumult. It even reached the National Audubon Society. Following a botched diversity meeting, a highly critical employee survey, and the resignations of 2 top diversity and inclusion officials, the 600,000-member National Audubon Society is confronting allegations that it maintains a culture of retaliation, fear, and antagonism toward women and people of color, according to interviews with 13 current and former staff members. One observer said, referring to the use of Twitter, Slack, Zoom, and the rest, to be honest with you, this is the biggest problem on the left over the last 6 years. This is so big, and it's like abuse in the family. It's the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, and you have to be super sensitive about who the messengers are. Okay. Yeah. So, I guess while I was on hiatus, the incredible story of Felicia Sonmez played out, where she got David Weigel, another reporter, a colleague on the Washington Post, suspended without pay for a month for retweeting, I thought was a fairly amusing joke that other people found grossly offensive. He apologized, he groveled, but he was still suspended for a month without pay. And then this woman, Sonmez, went on a rampage. Anyone who said, first of all, the people who said, hey, calm down. Can't we be civil here? Is this really the right way to deal with this sort of thing? She started blasting them, and then she started blasting management. As I say, just going on a rampage. Oh, and it all came down to whiteness, apparently. Well, I'm looking at a picture. One of the few known pictures of Felicia Sonmez. As far as I'm able to discover, Sonmez is a Turkish name. But looking at this woman's face and physiognomy, if she were any more white, she would be clear. Kat Rosenfield writes in Unheard, picture a huge poisonous fruit falling to the ground, its skin splitting open, the rancid pulp pouring out. Picture the ants discovering the mess, swarming over it, drunk on the abundance in front of them, and far too preoccupied with their feasting to ever look up at the tree it fell from. It's an apt metaphor for what happens during one of the public meltdowns that double as free entertainment for the extremely online. The splatter of drama, the rush to consume, the way we pick over every last sordid detail of the controversy until there's no meat left. What we miss is that the details hardly matter, as individually fascinating as they may be. Granted, some characters make this drama more riveting than others, and last week's iteration was a peak example of the form. Washington Post reporter Felicia Sonmez waged a 6-day war of attrition over a colleague's retweet of an off-color joke. The offensiveness or entertainment value of the joke itself is a matter of taste. What quickly became clear, however, is that the joke was not the point. The problem was what it represented, the mere tip of an imagined vast sexist iceberg lurking below the surface. Some claimed that it signaled the hidden sexism of the reporter. Dave Weigel, who retweeted it, others, including Sonmez, insisted that it was symbolic of a deep-seated culture of misogyny in the Washington Post itself. This type of projection is intrinsic to such online controversies. Nobody ever makes a one-off mistake. Everything is part of a pattern. We watch the action like a TV show, the call-out, the apology, the suspension of the colleague when the apology was deemed insufficient, the escalating demands from Sonmez, who not only supported Weigel's suspension, but wanted everyone who publicly criticized her public criticism to be professionally sanctioned as well. All this combined with a series of leaks from inside the increasingly exasperated Washington Post leadership apparatus built to a climax as hotly debated as the series finale of Lost. How could they possibly fire her? How could they possibly not? And there's a good comment here from Josh Barrow, commenting on this situation, he said, quote, "If you think a coworker sucks, you don't tweet about it. That's unprofessional. If you disagree with management's personnel decisions, you don't decry them to the public. That's insubordinate. Organizations full of people who are public at each other's throats can't be effective. Your workplace is not Fleetwood Mac," unquote. Well, why shouldn't it be? Not like Fleetwood Mac. Because isn't my life just as, important, significant, glamorous, etc.? I'm some NGO drone, but in my own mind, I'm holding up the earth. It was inevitable that this was going to happen, but again, it is just too funny, and it couldn't happen to a nicer group of people. I just imagine how, dreading coming to work, that imagine working at a place like the New York Times or the Washington Post, where I'll give you two examples. I'm sure this comes up every single day. You realize that relations between men and women, and say blacks and whites, or between whites and racialized communities, can be a little fraught. So let's say you're a man working at an organization like the Times or the Post, and you decide, okay, there's a lot of women complain about mansplaining and men getting too close to them and expecting emotional labor from you. And so you decide, I'm just going to take a hands-off approach. I want to give these women their space, so I'm just not, I'm just going to avoid them, pretty much. I'll put in the minimum amount. And then you get accused of being misogynist for this. Whereas if you had been more in your face, if you will, then you would have been criticized for that. In the same way, let's say you're, a white person at the Post or the Times, and you think, yeah, I know a lot of the black people who work here are seething at what they see as a culture of racism, so I am just going to make myself invisible to them, so they will have no cause of complaint against me, and then you get in trouble for that. Oh, I see how this works. I see how the white club works, how the boys club work. Oh, that there's some people, you're going to be mentors to some people, but not to others. But again, if the white man had done the opposite thing, he would almost certainly be accused of, white-splaining or mansplaining, or of attempting to appropriate the work or feelings of oppressed people. I mean, there's really no escape from this. I remember when working in a newsroom was fun. I mean, it was often tense, having to deal with deadlines and, finding out that politicians are all liars and, writing about horrible crime stories or whatever. But there was a lot of fun there now, and I just can't imagine that working in newsrooms is fun for anybody anymore. So more news from Canada. Finally, our glorious leader, Justin Trudeau, has deigned to permit me to go onto a plane again, or to go on to a train again as of Monday. You're going to have to wear a mask, though, while in Canadian airspace. And, oh, yes, what else is happening? Mandatory vaccination is not necessary for entrance into the House of Commons. But also, and this is disturbing news, the government has changed its definition of what counts as vaccinated. 3 jabs, not 2. And we have had the first COVID vaccine payouts in Canada. One of the compensated victims developed Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's Guillain-Barré. Okay, all right. I wonder how many more payouts there will be. Let's take a look at. Hang on. Let's take a look at the Eugipius's Substack. And here's a good piece from a few days ago called Against Corona Doom, Don't Worry Too Much. Okay. Oh, yes. And again, too funny, too funny. In the end, neither double masks nor double boosters could save him. NIAID director and unflushable turd Anthony Fauci, who in 2021 declared, quote, when people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are not going to get infected, unquote, has tested positive for corona. Like all the other celebrities to catch SARS-2, he is reported to be suffering mild symptoms, and he's on Paxlovid. Well, Fauci has not been in contact with Joe Biden. He did meet as recently as Tuesday with the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, so there's some chance that America's foremost corona astrologer got a little bit of super spreading in before his hourly antigen test came up positive. You know who just got SARS-2 for the second time? Why, that would be Justin Trudeau, who I believe has had 4 jabs. But of course, it's safe. It's safe and efficacious. They keep telling this that, so this must be true. Eugipius writes, masks plain, yeah, he makes a claim about masks based on studies, including a major study from Germany. From the BBC, outdoor public events have been banned in an area of France as record-breaking heat wave sweeps across Europe. From Die Welt, federal government considers making masks compulsory in October. The most destructive aspects of containment have been retired, but for what remains, they don't even bother with corona as an excuse anymore. All you need is a heat wave to ban mass gatherings in France. Now, public health officials just have to declare that everyone faces a health risk, and that's it. Your right to assemble is avoided. The lunatic German government, meanwhile, is feverishly trying to make masks a permanent feature of winter life, even if SARS-2 disappears tomorrow. Masks might curb respiratory infections, and that's all you need to mandate face coverings in a major Central European country these days. The depressing truth is that a lot of people, maybe 20% of all people, love these policies. We might have expected that of petty bureaucratic tyrants, but it's increasingly clear they're joined by vast numbers of ordinary citizens. I am so tired of masks, Eugipius concludes, but more than that, I am sick to death of these unkillable zombie virus solutions that we can apparently never get rid of, no matter how often or how thoroughly they're discredited by common sense and empirical studies, no matter whether their original justification even applies anymore. Well, it might work. It might. That's not what the evidence says, but it might. Don't you care about your fellow human beings? Let's go to Alex Berenson's Substack. Yeah, don't read this if you're vaccinated. mRNA COVID vaccines offer essentially no defense against Omicron only months after a booster shot, according to a major new study from British researchers. And it gets worse. It would seem that this is in the Science, the journal called Science, which is not a conspiracy theory publication, that repeated jabs might lead to people getting infected over and over again because they have lost natural immunity as a result, which is a frightening concept. Let's go to dailyskeptic.org. Oh, yes, France bans gatherings due to heat wave, and China uses COVID app to target protesters. This is from Will Jones at the Daily Skeptic. The expert group, HART, Health Advisory and Recovery Team, has delved into the Pfizer trial documents released following a U.S. court order and discovered that according to Pfizer's own antibody data, the vaccine efficacy in the trial was massively overstated and it appears to be as low as 0. Oh, and of course, the FDA has approved 6-month-old babies getting the jab because we must eliminate the control group. It seems to me that's what's happened here. Because, if we can no longer compare outcomes between jabbed and unjabbed, then we can simply make the declaration, well, of course the jab works. Everyone knows that it works. What about these people who got COVID, who've been vaccinated many times, who've got coronavirus several times? Oh, no, it's very mild. Very, very, very mild. Yeah, of course it is. Okay, I'm just gonna mention this briefly because, as previously noted, it is so disgusting that I don't want to sicken you, especially since many of you might be having a supper. Postmates, you shouldn't miss a good meal for a good time. That's why this Pride, we've teamed up with Dr. Evan Goldstein and Smart Throb to create the world's first bottom-friendly menu. Yup, it's real. If you don't know what any of these terms mean, don't look them up. Okay, don't look them up, and don't. There's a 1 minute 35-second video, and it goes into great detail, graphic detail about disgusting practices. And I guess that's the way that we live now. A piece that appeared in Unheard by a man called Tanjil Rashid, it turns out to be an unexpected justification of Enoch Powell. And he writes that the Queen's War on nationalism, she was Enoch Powell's most successful adversary. So he talks about his own family and how they are monarchists. His family is from Pakistan, and they were new Commonwealth immigrants, and his father was a new Elizabethan. Oh, I hate that term. The new Elizabethans, there was a great deal of optimism about the reign of the new queen, and it was going to be, like Queen Elizabeth the first time, a renaissance, as it were. Didn't turn out that way. Didn't turn out that way. So, who is the Queen? And is she British? Is she English? I don't know that. Does the Queen really think of herself in this way? Or does she see herself as being a universal figure? And Enoch Powell described the British Commonwealth in a wonderful way. I don't know, it seems pathetic to me that, we've lost the empire, but we're going to pretend that there's something like it that still exists. And even countries like India and others which do not recognize the Queen can be members of the Commonwealth. So, yes, Enoch Powell railed against the, quote, bogus, mythical, self-consoling invention of the British government, unquote, against the Queen's new role as its head, and of course against Commonwealth immigrants. The irony is that Powell could have made the same arguments as an Indian, say, and been regarded as a fairly standard post-colonial polemicist. Queen Elizabeth deserves credit as probably Powell's most successful adversary in those turbulent decades. She single-handedly preserved the old imperial high Toryism, which Powell and later Tories had turned against, using her charm to launder out of the darker stains of imperialism. Whereas for Powell, the nation-state was the ultimate political reality. For Elizabeth, it was the British Empire and its new egalitarian guise, the Commonwealth. In her famous broadcast on her 21st birthday, Princess Elizabeth pledged her life to serving all the peoples of the British Commonwealth and Empire, wherever they live, whatever race they come from, and whatever language they speak. Of course, the Queen never addressed him directly, but she was shadowboxing against Powell's English nationalism. Powell's ravings grew more virulent. It is truly when he looks into the eyes of age that the Englishman comes face to face with those who would dispute with him the possession of his native land. Powell would bellow. Eventually, Powell's decorum yielded. In 1984, he attacked Queen Elizabeth from a family of immigrants herself, using a phrase that would later be invoked knowingly or otherwise by Theresa May, citizen of nowhere. She was, Powell claimed, more concerned for a vociferous minority of newcomers than for the great mass of her subjects, threatening the place of the crown in the affections of the people, a prediction that was utterly refuted by the jubilant Union Jack waving of millions over the holiday. There's various opinions on how successful the Jubilee was. I've mentioned the Substack J'accuse before. And this fellow shares my belief about the Queen and her reign. It's called She's Been There Ages, So You Have to Respect Her. You just have to. Splendid British servitude. And he talks about the institutions, the essence of conservatism. To conserve, the cost doesn't matter. In fact, it doesn't even matter what it is. The important thing is that it doesn't change. Keep paying the tile. Get your tithe on the online banking. Already the streets are thronging with Brits of all shapes, colors, and sizes brought together by the servitude in which they relish. For this people's queen, who presided so gracefully over 60 years of uninterrupted social and economic decline, who went to those fancy openings and met with those foreign dignitaries week in, week out, having attractive clothes designed and put on for her, having a posh accent and living in nice houses. Very few people are capable of doing this. An incredible lifetime of achievement, a testament to human will, pushing the very limits of what the mind and body are capable of, existing and consuming. So impressive. Put up that bunting with Mr. Rajesh for number 4. Have a sip of Pimm's with Shimon. Get a bit carried away with Fatima's coronation chicken samosas. Be those quintessential Brits together. And reflect on your place in life, firmly at the bottom, romanticizing the hereditary privileges and inheritances of people who despise you, with a big British smile on your face. You know, Queen Elizabeth's uncle, the Duke of Windsor, or Edward VIII, he infamously said on the day that Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, there is not a single drop of blood in me that is not German. They are a German family. I suppose with the Princess of Wales entering it, there's some English blood there now. But it is difficult to look at the Queen's reign and not to understand her own conception of herself as a foreigner. Let's look at some of the things that have happened under her reign. Just waves, endless waves of fractious and rebarbative foreigners flooding Britain. Let's see, allowing the destruction under Edward Heath's government, Peter Walker, of the ancient counties of England, which had lasted for 900 years, allowing Tony Blair to wreck the House of Lords and turn it into a reward, a sinecure for the crooks and cronies he surrounded himself with, allowing, again, under Edward Heath's government, the loss of sovereignty, of British sovereignty, with the accession to the European Union, allowing the supplantation of the supremacy of Parliament by an institution called the Supreme Court. It's just, but the Queen doesn't have the power to intervene on any of these things. Or even to give advice, or even to make suggestions. Then what good is she? What good is she? If she's not supposed to have some connection, some profound connection with the British people, they could elect a president, as they do in places like Germany and in Israel. And this person will travel around and snip ribbons, you know? Let's go back to the chat. 400 years in the New World should count as indigenous, says Peter Bauman. And what else do we have here? I was in Facebook jail for 30 days when I talked with some uppity Ukrainians and was sent back to jail for 30 days after just 1 day of freedom, says Gamion. Polygon says, imagine simply giving your entire empire away because it might offend third worlders. Britain deserves everything it gets. Well, Enoch Powell, who had aspirations to be the viceroy of India, he served in the British Army. He went from private to brigadier general during that conflict. He thought with the Indian independence, which of course, the partition of India and Pakistan, which was just a colossal disaster, with millions being murdered, he thought that was it for the British Empire, that it should be abandoned as quickly and decently as possible, and time to start thinking in terms of a nation state. Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill destroyed the British Empire, said Brian Frakes. And Saxe Coburg Gotha, yes. It's hard to think that England would be any worse off now if Edward VIII had remained a king. That is from Anne Run. Tarot Destroyer says hospital-acquired infections rank among the top 10 leading causes of hospital deaths in the U.S., and surgical site infections contribute to 20% of them. I've been sipping Pimm's lately, says Blacklisted. Pimm's #1 cup. I remember having that drink made for me. It's kind of elaborate. Years ago, I found it refreshing on a hot summer day. Hello to the new Barry MC. Rivers of Blood, indeed. Hello to Jay Plutarski. Kevin, would you describe yourself as a Republican? Asked Yo Mama. No, I would not. The Windsors need to be replaced. Oh, yes. Let's go back to Queen Elizabeth. Her children have been a disappointment, to put it mildly. Prince Charles is a nutter. He is such a nutter that I don't know that he will be allowed to become king. I mean, when for many years your best friend is Jimmy Savile, what does that say about your judgment? The Queen and Prince Philip should have put their foot down with Prince Charles and said, you can't keep put off getting married. Lots of nice girls around, pick one. Instead, he picked the Princess of Wales, who was not suited for the job. Not at all. She was a flighty girl with little sense of responsibility and a massive ego, who apparently genuinely believed that after they were married, they would go out to discos and dance to Duran Duran. You have Prince Andrew, who is a despicable character. Princess Anne, she doesn't make waves anymore. She used to. The youngest one, Prince Andrew, seems like a decent fellow. But then, of course, you get the next generation with William and Harry. And Harry is a ginger waster, whereas William, he seems to talk about nothing about mental illness and trauma. Is that the sort of thing one expects from a future monarch? It's all about the heroism of suffering with him. And of course, as far as Meghan Mertz goes, again, Prince Charles should have put his foot down and said, well, if you insist on getting married, I suppose I can't stop you, but we're not going to make a grand spectacle of this. Probably because this marriage isn't going to work out very well for Britain, as indeed it has not. Okay. Bring back the Stuart, says Brian Frakes. Thatcher was friendly enough with Savile. Yes, says Emmett Kelly's Earth. And this is, again, appalling. I mean, what did she know and when did she know it? I mean, it's just, I'm overwhelmed by this feeling about Jimmy Savile. Just look into his eyes in the picture. Just look into his eyes in the picture. Would you let this man near any children? Would you let this man near hospital patients? Would you let this man make any responsible decisions? No, you would not, because his physiognomy screams both evil and insane. Okay. And I'm going to talk now about Barry, season 3, episodes 7 and 8. And episode 7, Candy Asses, was written by Liz Sarnoff and directed by Bill Hader. And episode 8, Starting Now, was written by Alec Berg and Bill Hader and directed by Bill Hader. And sorry if I'm repeating myself here. Bill Hader just continues to impress and impress as a director. Of course, a lot of people have been saying after the last 3 episodes that, when is when are they going to let Bill Hader be at the helm, of a big movie? Well, maybe this is as good as it's going to get for him, because if you're at the helm of a movie that costs $100 million, $200 million, $300 million, decisions are going to be taken away from you. There's all sorts of decisions. Oh, we don't like your script. We brought in these other people to rewrite it. It's such, there's a running joke about notes on Barry. It's a meta joke, because the show is not just about the world of gangsterdom. It's about the world of acting and television as well. But I've read interviews with Bill Hader in which he talks about just what a wonderful place HBO is to work at. People like him, they don't like him and Berg. They don't like getting notes from network executives because they're typically stupid. But he described a note he got from an HBO executive stating there were problems with season 3 because it was delayed, 2 years, because of the Corona doom. And so a network executive and then later an editor said, do we have the opportunity to do reshoots here? Because there seems to be a lack of continuity, that the flow has been broken up. So if we could insert a scene, it's 2 different cases. And Bill Hader said, yeah, you're right. Let's do it. Let's do it your way. And I just imagine there's a lot of people in television now who are they read this stuff and they're absolutely seething, The kind of, example that I gave as a note, it was made up. But how about if the next door neighbor is an alien? Well, you mean like an illegal alien? No, an alien from outer space. Actually, we're trying to go for a realistic feel for the show. No, but it would be funny. Don't you think? We have now both Bill Hader and Alec Berg were giving interviews about Sally Reed and the hatred for Sally Reed that you find, on the internet, particularly on social media, that a lot of people really don't like her. And I really don't like her myself. She's kind of a pitiable figure, but she's such a selfish and narcissistic figure. Her career is supposedly based on empathy, but I'm not seeing any empathy in the way that she behaves. And both Hader and Berg said in interviews they were upset. They were upset by the social media hatred for Sally Reed because Barry kills people and she doesn't. There's a problem there with looking at it this way. He is the star of the show. One is going to have to identify with Barry, maybe even empathize with Barry, because if you don't, then there's no reason to watch the show. You've seen this in Better Call Saul. You've seen it in Breaking Bad and in many other television shows. It's just unavoidable. But this has not been this year. The season started out with Sally Reed on a high, and it's not worked out very well for her. Her Banshee show, again based on her own life, or what she imagines to have been her own life. We know that she knows that she's lying about this, which was called Joplin. It turns out it got dropped by the streaming service for women called Banshee. Why? Because, in this town, nobody knows anything except the algorithm. And the algorithm didn't like the show. So she gets taken on, Sally gets taken on to the writing staff of the show that got a much lesser Rotten Tomatoes score. Pam, just seen as a ripoff of the show. And okay, well, it's better than nothing, right? And she seems to impress the writing room. Meanwhile, she's got Natalie working as her gopher, and she has kept her thumb firmly pressed down on Natalie's head from the very beginning of the series, stealing her parts, stealing a boyfriend, ridiculing her, and then Natalie becomes a PA, and she cuts her carrots into cubes, that sort of thing. And so Sally comes out of her writer's room, where she has made a suggestion. There was how would I put it, unkempt, the showrunner for the show that she's working on, that people were comparing to Dan Harmon, maybe in physical appearance. Dan Harmon of Community fame is a very intelligent man. No one can dispute that, and knows an awful lot about comedy. But so she's walking down the hall in these offices, and she hears all this laughter from another room. What's going on here? They seem to be having a good time. And she looks through the glass, and it's Natalie. Natalie entertaining the other writers with her antics, and they're all laughing hysterically. And it turns out that she has her own show. She's a showrunner of her own show, which is, of course, annoyingly called Just Desserts, because it's about a cupcake shop in Central Park, New York. And we had learned from the algorithm that shows that when you show people eating dessert in the first 5 or 10 minutes, then the show is going to be a hit. So there's going to be a lot of dessert eating in Just Desserts. Hader and Berg are up to Alan Partridge levels of coming up with just horrible names for shows. I don't think they quite reach the heights of Monkey Tennis, but perhaps one day. Sarah Goldberg as Sally Reed, again, it's really kind of a thankless role, because she's such an unsympathetic person, and they don't go out of their way to make her look good. I mean, physically good in it. And, well, she traps Natalie in an elevator and delivers a rather astounding, raging monologue. And Natalie took it much better than I would have, because, a person who gets that angry, you start to think, is this person going to try and kill me on the spot? But we see that, you see the parallelisms in Barry come up again and again, and this coming right up to a person and slapping a wall right next to them. We've seen that 3 times in Barry now, in 3 different circumstances. Now, we've had a new character enter in season 3, an ex-military man, Janice's, the detective's father. Very powerful looking and sounding man. One would not want to get on the wrong side of him. And it turns out that he had been a SEER instructor, and SEER is a technique, a school that's used in the U.S. military. And there was a great episode of the unit about it, just worrying about the extent to which SEER itself can be used as a form of torture of soldiers. It stands for survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. According to Wikipedia, it prepares U.S. military personnel, U.S. Department of Defense civilians, and private military contractors to survive and return with honor in survival scenarios. The curriculum includes survival skills, evading capture, application of the military code and conduct, and techniques for escape from captivity. In many such of these scenarios, it's assumed that you've been captured by a hostile power, and they are going to try to torture you. They're going to torture you in various ways. And Janice's father, there's just a tremendous scene where he's with, Mr. Cousineau, Winkler, and he's like, "I got something to show you in the garage." "What's that?" "It's an empty garage with two chairs. Sit in this chair." And he sits in the other. And he keeps asking the same question. This is a very powerful interview technique. "I don't believe you. You're not impressing me. You keep saying something is true or it isn't, but I don't believe you. And I'm just going to keep asking the question and asking the same question with a rising degree of intensity. And you'd be surprised how often that works. And so we see in episode 8, Gene Cousineau's mind being excavated, SEER style. I haven't said that much about Barry Berkman and Monroe Fuchs. I don't really want to give too much away. I fear that Hader and Berg have written themselves into a corner at the end of the 3rd season. And I was complaining about this show and others that it really needed events that were irrevocable. And we've seen irrevocable events in the 3rd season. No shortage of them. I'll just close out by saying, and just by commending Sarah Goldberg's acting again. And after it turns out that Natalie had recorded on her smartphone this deranged outburst, profane outburst against her in an elevator. And she put it up on the internet, or it got taken up by a entertainment website. And so Sally says she's going to make an apology video, and her agent, quite wisely, says, "No, don't. Just don't." So she does it anyway. And she really believes that Natalie has wronged her. And she gives one of the greatest non-apology apologies that I've ever heard. She also attempts to persuade us that a particularly foul 4-letter word referring to women, that in Europe they use this as a term of endearment. Well, I don't think that very many women do. And the apology video, it does not go well. And Sally's sacked. And she's kind of reached the end for her. And again, the show, the final episode, leads us with a lot of mysteries. But I'll just say that, there's also, again, not to give too much away, there is just a horrifying torture scene that takes place in Bolivia. And people were saying, "Well, isn't this supposed to be a comedy?" And Bill Hader said, "Well, I mean, it's 30 minutes, so people say that it's a comedy. But I mean, it's always been pretty dark from the beginning." And Bill Hader said that he wanted episode 8 to be like a panic attack, and it was exceedingly intense. But Popcasco 88 says Barry goes to some very dark places psychologically. You know, to what extent haters said that Barry's a dummy, you know, and he is a dummy. But can he be forgiven for what he's done? I don't think so. I don't think so. Killing people for money has long been regarded as the worst form of crime because where's your personal involvement? You got nothing against these people. And there's nothing specific. It's more a feeling of dread, says Palpcasso 88. And what I found hard to watch, the torture scene is filmed very cleverly because we don't see any of the torture. Well, in the first part, we don't. In the second part, we do. But it's just shown through sound design and to, how would I put this, certain stuff coming underneath walls. The sound design in this show, it's so admirable. They paid so much attention to this. The episode 6, which has the already famous freeway chase, most people would put music on that, and there's no music on it. And you're being told a visual story, but also an audio story. And there's a man on a motorbike, motocross, being chased by 3 others. And then there's a rule that if you have more than one person chasing down one person, and this works for running, cars, bicycles, they always catch up. And Barry's the motocross bike that he's forced to use has been damaged, and you can just hear just how weak sounding it is compared to the much more stronger sounding motocross bikes of his pursuers. KMG, do you think Barry is going to hell? Well, he said that. He said that in last week's episode. He said to Sally Reed, I know where I'm going when I die, and I don't want that to happen to you. Anyway, that's it for today and this week. A very brief week. Thank you all for turning up. I'm very impressed by your loyalty. And I'll see if I can get to work this weekend on switching to a different platform and getting up to speed on it. Hello to Head McNeck. And I will be back on the air Monday at, when do I start this show? 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all once again for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to make a donation to the show, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.